In November 1957, the snow in Plainfield was too clean to hide the smell. At 16 Elm Street, deputies entered the farmhouse of a quiet handyman named Edward Theodore Gein after the disappearance of Bernice Warden, a local hardware owner. Inside, they found what one officer later called a museum of human use. In the barn hung body parts repurposed for furniture, a lampshade, a belt, a mask. At first, the locals thought it was a mistake, a prank, a mad exaggeration. But the reports kept coming, each worse than the last. One shuttered photograph, waxy skin stretched over a kitchen chair, disappeared from the evidence room within days. Today, the only visible trace is a glass case in the Waushara County Historical Society bearing his name and a single marked folder labeled Property of State Archive. Decades later, Hollywood would turn it into a mask and call it the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Plainfield, population 500 and fading under early winters. In 1940, after the death of Ed Gein's father, only Ed and his mother Augusta remained on their 155-acre farm. She forbade him visitors, women, or, according to her Lutheran conviction, the corrupt town that worships desire. When she died in December 1945, Ed sealed her bedroom. The local paper described the house as a shell of unlived days. Neighbors remembered him as odd but helpful, always available for odd jobs at the school or local dump. Sheriff Art Schley later testified that no one thought much of him until the heads started turning up. But before that, in 1947, police records note a missing woman, tavern owner Mary Hogan. Locals joked, "She's probably with Ed." No one expected it to be literal. The first whisper appeared years later in the Plainfield Sun. A skull found among refuse behind the Gein barn, believed animal origin. In an interview transcript, December 1957 Wisconsin State Crime Lab, neighbor Irene Hill recalled hearing hammering at odd hours. It sounded like carpentry, but there was no new barn built. In 1954, farmhand George Foster told police he found a pile of what looked like tanned leather inside a shed. The sheriff dismissed it. At the time, there was no reason to search. Wisconsin law required probable cause, and Ed was polite, paying taxes, helping in snowstorms. When Bernice Warden vanished on November 16, 1957, her store ledger recorded a single entry: Ed Gein, antifreeze. It was his neat handwriting that opened the door to one of the most disturbing crime scenes in U.S. history. For 12 years, those warnings sat unfiled, lost to what Sheriff Schley later called rural trust. The yellowed statements remain in county archives, attached by metal clips that have stained the paper rust brown. Deputies Frank Warden, Bernice's son, and Art Schley found the body that evening, strung in a barn like a deer, decapitated, slit open. The photographs were sealed immediately. Inside the house, a heart in a paper bag, skulls turned into bowls, a belt of nipples, a box of faces. The inventory list occupies 16 pages, still archived at the Wisconsin Historical Society. One report notes a framed photograph of a woman in a coffin, image believed to be Gein's mother. No one explained how he had taken it. The sheriff collapsed during questioning. He reportedly struck Ed across the jaw. Officers' testimonies show conflicting accounts. Some claim Ed was calm. Others claimed he smiled, as if relieved it was over. Thus began what the press called the Ghoul of Plainfield. In the corners of forensic photographs, shadows cast by camera flashes resemble thin figures standing just beyond the frame. When lawmen cataloged the evidence, the line between object and person blurred. Detective Daniel Cruz later said it was carpentry and skin. Forensic photographs, now sealed, confirm several objects reconstructed from female corpses exhumed from 3 local cemeteries. Police logs reveal Ed visited graves at night in a daze-like state, exhuming parts he needed for his woman's suit. He admitted wearing it to feel close to mother again. The criminal insanity plea cites acute attachment disorder and gender confusion rooted in maternal idolatry. Contemporary psychiatrists avoided those words publicly, fearful of moral backlash in 1957. Locals avoided the site until after demolition. Yet, Strange tales persisted, deputies refusing to stay late in the evidence room. One recalled smelling earth when the box was opened. When the farmhouse burned down in 1958, the flames drew hundreds of spectators. No cause identified. Official record, fire of unknown origin. Plainfield changed overnight. Tourists from Chicago arrived to peer through fences. Children were kept home. The Waushara County Courthouse recorded 42 trespassing arrests in 1958 alone. Shopkeeper Ruth Meyer placed a sign, "No souvenirs sold here," but reporters still dug at the ashes, searching for buttons, nails, fragments. Sheriff Schley ordered the site cleared. In surviving radio audio from WISN Milwaukee, a preacher condemns curiosity as the devil's fruit. Yet interest deepened. Gein's Ford truck, used to transport bodies, was auctioned in 1958 for $760 to Kearney owner Bunny Gibbons, who used it in a traveling sideshow titled Ed Gein's Ghoul Car. Citizens protested, children fainted. Newspaper photographs document furious crowds overturning the exhibition. The horror became a commodity long before it became a screenplay. Rusted metal fragments from the farm's equipment continue to surface after heavy rains, even 60 years later. At Central State Hospital in Waupun, Wisconsin, Ed was diagnosed schizophrenic but cooperative. Psychiatrist Dr. Edward Schubert recorded over 50 hours of interviews. Ed drew floor plans of the farm from memory, labeling rooms Mother, Silence, and Don't Open. He received mail, mostly women. "I see the sadness in your eyes. You were misunderstood." One letter read, "The originals remain sealed by family request." Hospital orderly John Zebart, in a 1965 statement, claimed the sound of pacing often echoed from Ed's locked ward even when he was sedated. "We chalked it up to ventilation," he said. Still, the pattern matched footsteps. Years later, an intern retrieved the recorded sessions for study. The tapes malfunctioned, recurring static bursts like rhythmic breathing. No copy was ever released publicly. The hospital's former location is now an administrative building where, staff note, the third-floor hallway is consistently colder than adjacent rooms. Farm auction records list hundreds of items. Most were burned or buried under police supervision. Local folklore says some bones were never found. Gravediggers near Plainfield Cemetery claimed fresh disturbances into the 1960s. Photographs from 1962 show boot prints near the Gein family plot. Sheriff files mark "No prosecution, insufficient evidence." A retired guard recounted, "Sometimes kids dared each other to sit on the remaining foundation at night. The wind would change direction and they'd swear someone walked behind them." By now, the case had grown beyond law, into whispered haunting. There were no ghosts on record, but human grief, decades unaddressed, had made the place uncanny. Cemetery custodian records from 1966 note repeated cleanup of small offerings, buttons, cloth scraps, and candles left at the unmarked property boundary. Each item was removed, cataloged, and stored in county archives. None were ever claimed. In 1973, a young director in Austin, Tobe Hooper, read about the Ed Gein case in Life magazine's archive, Wisconsin Murder House. He later told journalists, "It wasn't the blood that frightened me, it was the silence of the photographs." His script, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, became a mythic adaptation, turning one man's delusion into a brood of cannibals. The chainsaw was invention, the skin mask was not. Producers avoided naming Gein to escape legal claims, but their press kit referenced Midwestern crimes that shook the nation. The public conflated fact and fiction. In Wisconsin, residents protested being forever tied to Hollywood's monster. Letters in the State Historical Society described tourists asking directions to Leatherface's farmhouse. It was as though the legend wanted to exist. At film screenings, theater managers reported recurring electrical issues during specific scenes. Projection equipment manufacturers found no explanation. By the late 1970s, criminologists and psychologists revisited Gein's files. The University of Wisconsin's Department of Behavioral Sciences published Case 213, Gein, Ed T., a sanitized summary used in profiling studies. Dr. Harold Schechter, later author of Deviant, 1989, obtained rare access to original transcripts. He noted, "Every horror film that followed carries his reflection." Meanwhile, Plainfield Historical Society faced a dilemma: preserve the story or let it rot. Minutes from a 1979 meeting record the vote, 3-2 in favor of creating a restricted archive. One member resigned that day, writing, "We risked turning tragedy into pilgrimage." By then, Gein, 61, had become a quiet hospital patient who painted farmhouses in watercolor. The paintings were auctioned once. Buyers claimed proceeds went to the victims' families. Shortly after, the auction house received unsigned notes. "You shouldn't have moved the images. Let them rest." In 1981, reporter Patricia Colby from the Milwaukee Journal visited the hospital for a retrospective. She described the ward's stillness. "He looked at me and said nothing. The only movement was the reflection of clouds on the glass." A week later, her photograph of the cell door appeared misdeveloped, the outline blurred, resembling fabric folds. The darkroom technician logged, "Negative underexposed, possible light leak shaped like a face." When Colby returned to photograph the Gein exhibit at the Historical Society, the staff refused after-hours access. "We found the latch open the morning after journalists came through," wrote curator Nancy Elbrecht in 1983. Visitors began complaining of cold drafts and static in tape recorders. Museum policy soon required that no one handle the object labels without gloves. Audio equipment at the Milwaukee Journal offices repeatedly malfunctioned when playing interviews about the case. Technical staff replaced the equipment 3 times in 1982 alone. By the 1990s, Leatherface had become camp, a carnival of sequels and masks. Interview magazine quoted Tobe Hooper, "It was never meant to mock Wisconsin. It was about how horror lives next door." Yet for Plainfield residents, it never ended. The Worden family declined every interview. The farm's former coordinates were intentionally omitted from county maps. State officials destroyed the remaining evidence in 1958, but rumor claims one jar survived. In 2001, collector Carl Wards claimed to own a chair made by Gein, though forensic tests proved otherwise. He received anonymous warnings online. The skin remembers. Between myth and document, the truth became blurred until the archives themselves seemed charged by what they tried to hide. Visitor logs from the Waushara County Museum show a recurring name each November 16th. The handwriting varies, but the signature remains constant: Mother Gein. Today, at the Waushara County Historical Society Museum, a single display remains: a wooden box labeled "Recovered Fragments, Property of the State." Inside, photocopies of inventories, a broken belt buckle, and a small tag that once labeled "Lampshade Human Dermal Origin." Visitors describe unease. One wrote in the guest book, 2015, "Camera battery died at the case, worked again outside." Another note in 2022, "Came here for curiosity, leaving uneasy. Please close this exhibit." The curator, Ellen Prieb, keeps a recorder. Running in the room after closing. Once, at 11:47 p.m., it caught a sound, steady, hollow, almost like cutting cloth. "No one's supposed to be in here," she said in an interview. "But there's something about handling those lists, the way your hands shake on the typewriter, as if someone else remembers too." Gein died of cancer on July 26, 1984, buried beside his mother. His gravestone was soon stolen, recovered in 2001 from Seattle, and now lies in storage under code EX201. Every decade his story resurfaces, in remakes, interviews, online myths. Each time new claims emerge, sightings of flickering lights on the site, footsteps along the overgrown path, letters mailed to the museum signed in looping script, "A friend of mother." The narrator closes the archival file in the muted light of the records room. For a moment, the silence feels attentive. Before leaving, the investigator leaves one small gesture. The folder lid gently lowered, fingertips brushed along the edge, almost an apology. As the recording clicks off, the voice fades with a final note. Some cases never sleep. They wait, not for believers, but for the next one who looks too closely.